Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Dr. Carmen McGuinness. So we're here for part 2 of one segment. It's a 2-part segment called Excavation Digging into You. So this is part 2. On Sunday I recorded and uploaded part 1 of that segment. If you haven't seen part 1, please view it before you view part 2. We are going to briefly go over what we did in part 1 simply so that we can kind of take it from there. But please do go back and view that segment if you have not already. So the example I used in part 1 of this segment was what I viewed as intensity in my ex-lover. That was the thing that I saw and wanted, intensity. And that was Step 1 of that, was identifying that. Step 2 was the thing I wanted when I saw or imagined those intense, adoring eyes, was focused, valuable attention, identifying that thing. And step 3 was for me to recall back to my childhood and identify who it was that I wanted that from as a child. And I identified my mother. So again, if you haven't viewed that, please do, because we're going to kind of pick it up from there. So now perhaps for you, it was something else that you desired from your toxic partner, which can be traced back to childhood. Maybe it was security. That's something that I often hear from clients with whom I do this exercise. To have another person take responsibility for your security is very powerfully reinforcing. It's what behavior analysts call negative reinforcement. It's when something aversive is removed. An example I use is my back itches, I scratch it, the aversive is gone. That's reinforcing. I'm highly likely to scratch my back the next time it itches because it worked. In relinquishing responsibility for our own security, we have that negative reinforcement. We let go of the difficulties of life. They're simply removed, just like in childhood, or just like what childhood should be. So another thing that clients have identified is control or rules. We didn't have rules when I was a kid, I hear. Well, we all like to know the rules in life. In fact, the way we learn to control ourselves is by having reasonable control lovingly placed upon us as children. Those of us who were raised with very few rules, or who had rules but maybe they were unfair, or had rules that were tremendously inconsistent, might even crave a relationship with someone who lays down the law to us. Today I'm going to share 2 more activities with you to avoid a pattern of toxic relationships. For the first one, we'll tie together unconditional love, something we give to young children only, and emotional intimacy, something that we give only to those who've earned it. And I'm going to define each of those terms for you. Unconditional love is absolute love, regardless of what the child does or says. Imagine an 18-month-old, who slaps his mother's hand when she stops him from playing in the toilet. Or say a 5-year-old who loses his mom's favorite necklace that when she put it on her doll, when she was playing dress up with her doll. You still love that child because she's a child. The love we feel for children has no boundaries. We never put them up because we've had these small people since they came into the world, or shortly afterwards if you're an adoptive parent. Intimacy between lovers is similar to unconditional love, but it is not the same. In romantic love, we drop our boundaries. We did have boundaries. We start to let them down slowly as we fall in love and as we gain trust. It's a slow process. We let them down slowly. They did exist, but with trust and mutual love, we lower them, becoming vulnerable. And that vulnerability is what defines intimacy. Intimacy is the willingness to be vulnerable with another person, but only after we trust them. What I want you to do for this activity is to consider first the sequence of becoming vulnerable with that toxic person in your life, your ex, hopefully your ex. What came first? Trust and then lowering the walls? Or did you lower the walls too soon before the trust was actually earned? If the answer is the latter, too soon, then consider this. Children don't earn trust before they love unconditionally. They just love. So maybe that's what you were doing with your ex. Now, children may lose trust. That does happen, sadly. It actually is what occurs in the development of avoidant personality disorder. But first, they love completely, and they don't even think about trust. Ask yourself if that's what you did. If an infant doesn't wonder if he can, an infant doesn't wonder if he can trust his parent to warm up his bottle when he's crying. He just cries. And mom or dad comes along with the good stuff, right? Mom and dad don't exercise conditional love while warming the bottle. They don't think, oh, you've been a good baby this week, I'll give you your bottle. They just do because they love the child unconditionally. So if your answer to the question, what came first in your affair with your ex, trust and then lowering the walls, or did you lower the walls too soon before trust was earned? If that's your answer, then, or if maybe you even kept the walls down after trust was lost, then ask yourself this question. Who did I want unconditional love from as a child and perhaps not get it? Hopefully by now you're starting to see a pattern, your pattern. You, all of us, repeat in our adult relationships the same patterns that emerge in childhood. If you were loved unconditionally and able to love back unconditionally without disappointment, you've probably been successful in your life at making and keeping boundaries until someone earned the right for you to lower them and share intimacy. But you're probably not watching this video because you answered, yes, I did that. I have boundaries. If that doesn't describe you, if you're the one that doesn't have the boundaries, if you do let them down too soon, or if you don't put them up when someone has lost your trust, then ask yourself who it was who let you down in childhood. Once again, as I asked in my first several segments of this isn't a blame game. So I'm asking you to understand that this isn't a blame game. We're simply excavating you. This is an exercise in self-discovery. It's an exercise about you. So why? Why do that work? So that you don't make the same mistake again. Boundaries are important, and we all need them. They come down when and only when someone earns our love and trust. Recognizing and understanding the connection between adult intimacy and childhood unconditional love hopefully will help you recognize old patterns the next time you experience the desire to bare your soul with little or no trust. The second exercise I'm going to share with you tonight is to literally map out on a piece of paper the events that gave you the highs and lows in your toxic relationship. The reason I'm going to do this is because I want you to understand that what you experienced was an addiction of sorts. So for this activity, you're going to need several pieces of paper, which you may need to tape together because you're going to kind of go sideways with this, or you're going to need several pieces of adding machine tape, one or the other. So on your paper, write a few words that represent a time when you were really happy with your ex, like the happiest you've ever been. I don't want a long line of words here. I don't want you to get lost in this. This is not the them work. This is the you work. So it might be something as simple as Key West. So now draw a line extending out from those words off to the right. On that line, write down what happened next. And take your time, pause the video if you need to. Now, I'll bet that what you've written is something along the lines of, he seemed to get bored, or we settled into a less intense vibe, or he lost interest in me for a while. These are the sorts of things that I've heard from other clients, from clients. You are not a client. Now, remember how that made you feel. Really get your heart around that feeling. When you have it, when you have that sensation, that memory, write an X across the line right after the words that you wrote. So in my example, it would be Key West, we lost interest, or he lost interest in me, how I felt, X. Okay? That X represents the craving. That's what your heart was doing when you were miserable. It was craving the better times before that, the Key West. When you were perhaps being love-bombed. Now draw another line extending out to the right after the X. On that line, write a few words to describe what happened next. Again, just a few words. I don't want you to get lost in sadness here. Some examples I've heard from clients are, I had a temper tantrum, or I put my foot down, or I cried a lot, or we had many long talks. I was trying to figure out what went wrong. Now you know the drill. Draw another line to the right. On it, write down a few words that represent what happened next. Pause the video if you need to. I'll bet the keys to my Beamer, keep in mind the payments due, that you wrote something along the lines of, things got a bit better, because that's what happens. Now, get your heart, and this time your mind, your head, around how you felt when things got a bit better. When you do, write another X on the line after those last few words. That X represents what you were craving, getting that relief from the craving. Just enough relief to keep you hooked on the drug, on the fantasy love. With an actual drug addiction, we need more and more of the drug because our brains make more and more opioid receptors. These are like little receivers, literally on the walls of your brain, that go on happy and relieved mode when an opioid molecule comes along and matches it. They're literally like little shapes that match up. So with an actual drug addiction, we need more and more opioids to get high, to get that high feeling, because otherwise we just fill the opioid receptors and just go back to sort of baseline. We don't get the high. But here's the deal. This isn't a real drug addiction. It's a fantasy love addiction. And what the fantasy girl or guy, forgive me fellas, wants is she wants to do what she does best. She wants to make this all feel better. So what she does is she picks up the slack. She picks up the slack with her fantasy. So even a little bit of attention, the smallest amount of security or control or whatever it was that was that first X, that thing that you were craving, she can embellish it. And with all her beautiful hopes and dreams and wishes and her imagined love, That's right. The love we imagine comes from our beautiful hearts, not from that toxic partner. So that's how we stay addicted. That's how we get enough of what it is we need. We add to it. That's our failing. That's where we go wrong. That's why we're here trying to become those people who just get what they need and don't have to make it up as they go. Create the fairy tale. Now, one more activity for you today, because this is hard work. So we're just going to do one more. We'll use those same notes that you just created with all the X's, but it's a different activity. You're not going to need to make notes on them anymore. We're just going to refer to them. So go to any of the X's that you felt when things were going badly, the X's that are toward the right. Ask yourself, did you feel you were being tested when things were going badly? Did you feel you just needed to show him or her that you love him that much, so much, that you'd put up with this treatment and keep fighting for him? If the answer to that question is yes, then ask yourself, who in your childhood made you feel that you needed to pass tests all the time, that you had to keep trying harder and harder, had to be the good girl or boy in order to get the love, security, the rules, the attention, whatever it was that you craved then. Now we're going to call it a wrap for the day. I've given you a lot to think about, a lot to work on. Excavation work is hard. The me work is really hard. In some ways it's harder than the them work. As always, if you need support beyond what you're finding on the tube, on the YouTube, reach out. I can be contacted through the links on the About tab. Have a wonderful day and a beautiful weekend.